Reflecting back on my Hashimoto's journey is such a trip because I remember the day I got diagnosed like it was yesterday, and all of the feelings that came with that diagnosis, which for me was a lot of feelings of hopelessness, if I'm being honest. I felt like I was standing in front of a mountain that I wasn't sure if I could climb. My name is Shauna, and I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in October of 2023, and I considered myself completely cured by May of 2026. I did have a baby in this time, so your timeline will probably look different. When I first got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, I went into a very manic research spiral trying to find anything and everything that could help me heal myself, and all I really wanted was to watch someone's sit down YouTube vlog about their journey and how they did it. And so I promised myself that if I ever got to the point of being completely healed, that I would make that video for somebody else in my position. So here we are. Just a little disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical professional. This is just my journey and what worked for me. My intentions for this video is to walk through the trial and error process that I went through in hopes of saving somebody else time and sharing the things that did and did not work for me. So here is my whole story. My symptoms came on in the summer of 2021. I was planning my wedding, which obviously was stressful, but it was good stress. Unfortunately, we know that the body can't tell good stress from bad stress. And then simultaneously, I had a traumatic work experience, and I think that those two things together triggered my Hashimoto's. A common thread I've noticed in the women in my life that have autoimmune disorders is we've all experienced trauma. I do think that is a conversation that is missing in the Western medicine world, because I do think that mental health can very much affect the physical body. My main symptoms were insomnia. I would go 3 to 5 days without sleeping, and when I did sleep, it would only be for 1 to 2 hours at a time. I had fatigue, and I had inflammation, which I perceived as weight gain. My cycles were irregular. They were averaging between 40 and 50 days, which 3 weeks in the luteal phase is brutal. I also had really painful periods to the point where my cramps would make me throw up. Because of my period symptoms, I kind of thought I maybe had PCOS, which is now called PMOS, if you haven't heard that news. But a lot of those symptoms did not resonate with me, so I was kind of confused on what was going on with me. I also experienced pregnancy loss, which is ultimately what led to my diagnosis. The pipeline to me getting diagnosed started with my miscarriage. My husband and I discovered at our second ultrasound that our baby no longer had a heartbeat. I had what is known as a missed miscarriage, and they call it that because your body misses that the baby has passed. So essentially, I was still experiencing all of my pregnancy symptoms because my body was working so hard to grow my baby, and I didn't know that anything was wrong. After my miscarriage, I did ask my OBGYN for a hormone panel. I had like an intuitive inkling that something was wrong with my thyroid, and I am someone who processes things through information and kind of understanding, and I wanted to know what went wrong. So I asked my OBGYN for these tests, and I was rejected because they said miscarriage is so common that they would not run the tests until I had a second miscarriage. And so I did not accept that, and I decided to go elsewhere to get some answers. I found a naturopath, Dr. Joanne, who I love so much. I feel like she was the first doctor I ever went to that really listened to me. I told her about all of my symptoms, my pregnancy loss, and then my intuitive feelings that I should look at my thyroid. And she ran an extremely comprehensive blood panel. She also asked me about my job, my stress load, my environment, and my mental health and the trauma that I had experienced. And she was the first doctor to really look at the whole picture. And I think that that is so important because our environment and our mental health 100% affect our physical body. When I got my blood work back, it was really clear that I had Hashimoto's, and it was really clear that I didn't have PCOS. I also had candida overgrowth in my gut and several vitamin deficiencies. Dr. Joanne felt like I was at a crossroads, essentially. She felt like I was okay to try to pursue natural healing. Her and I agreed that I was going to do a 3-month trial period of trying to heal myself naturally. And if I saw results, then I would continue to try to heal myself naturally and try to reverse my Hashimoto's. But if my symptoms got worse, if my blood work got worse, then I agreed I would go on medication. I just want to throw out there that if your doctor sees your blood work and tells you that you need immediate help and that you need to go on medication, please listen to your doctor. I also think getting a comprehensive blood panel is so important because as someone who tried to self-diagnose through the internet for 2 years, I wish so badly that I would have gotten this blood work panel done sooner because I really didn't know what I was dealing with until I had that information. It's kind of just guessing. The first thing that I did was supplement with all of the vitamins and minerals that I was deficient in. Essentially, with Hashimoto's, your body is in an extremely stressed state, and I did not want any energy being dedicated to the things that I was deficient in. I wanted all of my energy to be going to healing myself. I also took a beef organ complex because my doctor recommended that for helping with my cycles. And then I took a 30 or 60 day, I can't remember, a 30 or 60 day course for candida overgrowth. I also made major changes to my diet. I cut out gluten, dairy, refined sugar, and alcohol. I know that that probably sounds like a lot, but I wanted a baby so badly that I was locked in. And for me, it was more about making swaps than cutting things out completely. For example, I am someone that literally needs a sweet treat every single day. And so instead of using white sugar in my baking, I used coconut sugar, maple syrup, honey. We are living in the best time to be gluten and dairy free, okay? There are so many great swaps, and even with alcohol, there's some really good mocktails. Another approach that I had was instead of cutting things out of my diet, I just tried to add more things in that I knew would be beneficial for me. One thing that Dr. Joanne and I noticed about my eating habits is I was basically eating no fat, which is so important for our bodies, especially as women. We need healthy fats. I was adding avocado to everything. I would add coconut oil to my coffee. If I could drizzle something with olive oil, I would. I feel like in the health and wellness world right now, there's so much talk about gut health. And I do think gut health is super, super important, but that was not my main focus in my Hashimoto's journey. What I did for my gut health at the time is I would drink a cup of beef bone broth every morning on an empty stomach, and then I would eat a spoonful of kimchi or sauerkraut throughout the day. At the time, I was exercising pretty hard because I was having all of this inflammation, which again, I perceived as weight gain. And what I didn't realize is with high intensity workouts, I was stressing my body out so much because I was in a fragile state. I switched my workouts to yoga and Pilates and noticed an immediate shift in my fatigue and energy levels. The yoga flows that I absolutely love and still do are by Charlie Follows on YouTube. I will link some of her practices below in the description box because I love her. I think that she does such an amazing job with her flows and then also adds some somatic work in there, which I think is also important. I think that yoga is so good for your nervous system too, because if you think about it, you're putting your body in really uncomfortable positions and then you're breathing through them. And I think that that can be very metaphorical to life, right? Sometimes we go through uncomfortable things and we just have to tell ourselves that it's going to be okay. And it usually is. I was also trying to do some cycle syncing habits to get my body into a rhythm. A couple things that I would do is drink red raspberry leaf tea in my luteal phase. I would also eat raw carrot salad, which, to be honest, now I just eat raw carrots. I don't have time to make the whole salad, and it's just as effective. If you didn't know, carrots actually help you shed excess estrogen in your gut. And when I tell you my periods are so much better now, I have basically no cramps if I keep up on the red raspberry leaf tea and the carrots, which I think is like the greatest hack of all time. So highly recommend. I would also try to plan my social times to be in my follicular and ovulatory phase, and then I would try to rest more in my luteal phase. I also was just trying to rest more in general, which was very hard for me as a people pleaser. Saying no is not my first instinct and was something that I had to learn how to do. I do think that the healing journey can be very isolating for that reason, right? Like, you're just in a season where you need more rest, and I just want to encourage anybody that might be in that season right now that you will be able to do all the things that you want to do again. It's just a phase. It's just a season of life right now. Those were all the things that I did in that 3-month period of trying to figure out if I could reverse my Hashimoto's naturally. And when I got my blood work done, it was working. My antibodies had lowered, my T3 and my T4 levels were much better. And instead of being happy and excited, I felt utterly disappointed and devastated that I didn't completely heal myself in that 3 months. It does sound a little delusional, but at the time, I felt like I was giving everything to this healing journey. And looking at my blood work, it made me realize this was going to be a much slower process than I anticipated. I think I also was just putting so much pressure on myself because, again, I wanted a baby so badly, and I felt like everyone was getting pregnant around me and I wasn't. I remember at my lowest point, I called my husband on his lunch break and I asked him if he wanted a divorce because I didn't know if I would ever be able to have a child. And God bless him, he believed in me before I ever believed in myself. And I am so happy to report that I did fall pregnant a year later, and I have the most perfect little angel baby. So I learned from my OBGYN that some people go into remission when they get pregnant, and some people, their Hashimoto's really flares up and it's a high risk pregnancy. I am so grateful to say that my Hashimoto's went completely dormant when I was pregnant. I was getting the best sleep of my life. My symptoms basically disappeared. My daughter ended up being a breech baby, specifically a Frank's breech, which is 1% of all breech babies. So her legs were up by her head, and therefore I ended up having to have a C-section. I kind of assumed that postpartum would be hard, and I assumed that my symptoms would flare up, but I really had no idea what was in store for me in this next chapter. The first thing that my Hashimoto's affected postpartum was my milk supply. It is common with C-section moms that your milk supply comes in later, or you may have a low supply. And then also, if you have any sort of thyroid conditions, you are more likely to have a low milk supply. That hit me really hard. Being a first-time mom, I felt like a total failure that I couldn't supply enough food for my baby. And I became very stressed out about my milk supply. supply. I was able to get my milk supply up to the point where I only needed to supplement with a couple ounces of formula, and I'm very grateful for that, especially because all my Western medicine doctors told me it probably wouldn't be possible for me to do so. The next major thing that happened to me postpartum was my dad getting diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer 5 weeks after I gave birth. And I do believe that this was the cause of my postpartum anxiety. As soon as we got the news, I just knew that my dad was going to die, and I have experienced the loss of a loved one. One of my closest friends died in a car accident, and I have PTSD from that time in my life, and that PTSD was triggered by my dad's diagnosis. You know, when you're a new mom, you are already bombarded with so many intrusive thoughts of basically like anything that could possibly cause harm to your baby. Then my PTSD telling me people do die just caused me to have the most insane, severe postpartum anxiety spiral. I convinced myself that if I slept while my daughter slept, that she would stop breathing and die. So I would stay awake all hours of the day. I think I went 72 hours without sleeping because I was so afraid that my daughter was going to die. Even if my husband took her for the night, I felt like if I was not there watching her, that she would die. I'm so thankful that I had such an amazing therapist who helped me so much. And one of the things that she told me was that babies are built to survive. And she also told me I was one more sleepless night away from being hospitalized. And so that kind of like kicked me into gear of being like, well, I don't want to be hospitalized because then I'll be away from my baby. So I really do need to sleep. Next thing that happened a couple weeks after my dad's diagnosis, because of my daughter's position and her size, she measured in the 100th percentile in all categories when she was born. When all of my organs and everything went back and there was no longer a baby inside me holding everything in place, my rib dislocated. It's funny because when I had my C-section, I remember afterwards I was like, I've never been in this much pain. This is the most painful thing I've ever experienced. And then my rib dislocated and I was like, this is the worst pain I've ever experienced. I could not stand up straight. I literally was crawling room to room. I could not hold my daughter. I could not nurse my daughter. I was devastated. My body was under so much stress with all of this going on that I gained 30 pounds in 1 month. Yes, the only way I can think to describe it is in Willy Wonka when Violet eats the gum and she blows up like a blueberry. That was me. Every morning, I'll show some photos. I would go into the mirror and I would look at my arms. I would have giant purple stretch marks completely down my arms. I had giant stretch marks from the top of my thighs all the way down to my ankles because I was gaining weight so quickly. I went to the doctor and my blood work confirmed that my Hashimoto's had never been worse. And my doctor told me, you know, there's nothing you could have done. There's nothing you could have eaten to gain this much weight this quickly. So we knew that it was inflammation from Hashimoto's and stress. I was at such a low point. I felt like I couldn't be fixed. I entered a very, very dark place mentally. And then this triggered my postpartum depression. And I will say that I think that a lot of times when people hear that a mom has postpartum depression, they immediately assume that the mother doesn't love being a mother and doesn't love her kid. And that could not be further from the truth. My daughter is the joy of my life. And honestly, she was the light at the end of my tunnel through this entire time. I was just struggling so deeply with self-image at this time because my body was already completely different from having a baby and breastfeeding, and then gaining 30 pounds on top of that with bright purple stretch marks that I couldn't hide. This was also peak summertime, so it's not like I could just wear a baggy hoodie and some sweatpants. We're in 90-degree weather over here. The first thing that I did to get myself out of this dark hole was rereading the book Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. My friend Shelby got me this book when I was in my first round of healing, kind of in the peak of me feeling like I would never get pregnant. And in this book, Joe talks about how for some reason as humans, we think that fate is predetermined and that we can't change the path of our life, and this is just not true. What we have to change is our thought loops, and I was stuck in a really negative one. I was thinking, I'm always going to look this way. This is just my new reality. Everybody says anyways that your body is never the same after you have a baby, and they were right. And instead, I had to change that thought loop into positive thoughts of, I'm so grateful that this body grew my baby. I'm so grateful that I was able to have a baby and that I'm able to be postpartum. And I know that I'm going to be strong again. I did things like buying new clothes. I think that that's really important. I feel like a lot of women, we have this mindset of keeping clothes forever so that we can fit into them again. I think just buy new clothes, buy an outfit that makes you feel nice and comfortable. It will reduce so much stress. Because of the conversation I had with my doctor about my weight gain being inflammation related, this really got me into lymphatic drainage. Essentially, what I started doing was a 4-minute lymphatic drainage massage every night before bed. I will link the one that I do down below in the description box. And then I do my legs up the wall for 5 minutes every night, because this also helps your lymphatic system. And because I had so much inflammation, my lymphatic system was working overtime. So I just wanted to do things that could support the detoxification and the flushing out of everything. This was also the time that I discovered box breathing, which is when you inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and then exhale for 4 counts. This type of breathing signals to your body that you're safe, and my nervous system was just so activated at this time in my life. And I have to say that box breathing is the only thing that has ever helped my insomnia. I have literally tried everything under the sun for my insomnia. I have tried multiple prescriptions. None of them worked. I've tried every sleep supplement you can think of. I've tried meditation. Nothing worked for me except for box breathing and calming down my nervous system. And I know that this really works because my dad passed away about a month and a year after his diagnosis, and it is the most devastating thing I have ever experienced. And I still have been able to fall asleep every night using box breathing. For my rib injury, it took 3 months of physical therapy for me to even be mobile. So when I started exercising again, I was going extremely slow because I was so afraid of re-injuring my rib. I started out with very gentle beginner yoga flows, and then as I felt stronger and stronger, I went to more intermediate and then advanced yoga. Once I felt like I was strong enough, I started doing Pilates and then added weight, but I would kind of gauge on how I was feeling. If I did a workout and I felt exceptionally exhausted afterwards, I would know that I kind of pushed myself too far. And as someone who used to be a push through the pain kind of person, it all caught up to me. What I've learned through this entire process is that I need to listen to my body. And I do think that that is such a beautiful silver lining that has come out of my Hashimoto's journey, is I am so in tune with myself and I'm better for it. I noticed about 4 months in of restarting my healing journey that I was losing weight. And if you have Hashimoto's, then you know that one of the symptoms is the inability to lose weight. So to me, this was a huge indicator that I was moving in the right direction. Yes, it was slow, but it was happening. My cycles started improving. My cycles started becoming 38 days, then 37, then 35, which for me was a huge win because they say a normal cycle is 30 to 35 days. So I was already seeing improvement. And then I discovered aloe vera juice, which I believe is the habit that took me to the finish line. If you haven't watched my previous video, I do talk about it there in more detail, but essentially there was a 9-month-long study done in 2018 where women drank 50 milliliters of aloe vera juice a day and their antibodies dropped down to 37% of what they were. And that is the high end of the study. Some of the women, their antibodies dropped all the way down to 0%. So I truly think that drinking the aloe vera juice was the final piece in my puzzle to get me to be completely healed. And I realized in May of 2026, I had my third perfect 30-day cycle. I had no insomnia. I have lost a lot of weight, and I essentially had no Hashimoto symptoms. And my blood work reflected that I am completely healed. It is so surreal going through this entire journey, being on the other side of it now. And again, my biggest hope with this video is giving anyone on their healing journey hope that they can do it. Because I'm telling you, I really thought that it wasn't possible at certain points, but I did it. I hope that going through my story can give you a little bit of encouragement and inspiration. I think that, progress is not linear, and my journey very clearly demonstrates that. And I just want to remind anyone who might be going through their healing journey right now that consistency over time is a formula that will never let you down. So thank you so much for watching, and I am wishing you all the best of luck on your healing journey.